Let's talk about fats during exercise. As we mentioned, fat is a important energy source during exercise. And we can measure the amount of fat utilized as a fuel during exercise or even at rest. We can measure that. We already discussed the RER in previous chapters, but just here to remember, it's kind of like a reminder of this term. RER stands for respiratory exchange ratio. If it is zero point 0.7, we can conclude that we are burning 100% fat. And if it is 1, it's 100% carbohydrate. So, respiratory exchange ratio, it has a formula. It like divides the amount of carbon dioxide produced over oxygen consumption. That's how we measure respiratory exchange ratio. And it gives us numbers. So here, this is the summary of run pace, different levels of running pace, and the RER. So here at rest, heart rate is 7.2, RER is 0.77. The amount of energy coming from fat is 78%. I just rounded down, so 78%. And 22% is coming from carbohydrate. And if we are increasing our speed or pace, which is in minute per mile, so like going from 9 minute and 30 seconds per mile to 8 minute per mile, we are increasing our run pace. As you look at the RER, kind of we are increasing our RER, which means our body is trying to burn more carbs compared to fats. RER closer to 1 means more carbs, closer to 70.70, it's more fat. So when we are increasing our run pace, we are increasing the amount of energy coming from carbohydrates compared to fats. And at rest, the total energy expenditure is 1.4 kilocalorie per minute. So, there's a rule of thumb for the amount of energy expenditure during rest or when we are sleeping, which is between 1 to 1.4 in men, and it's a little bit less than 1 among women. So at rest, we highly depend on our fat source, fat storage. But at the same time, the important thing about this table, it's kind of shows us we are burning both carbs and fats, but their proportions to each other are different depending on the exercise intensity and even duration. And we will talk about that. So here, this figure on the right side shows the fuel usage as intensity increases. So on the x-axis, we have exercise intensity, which is running speed or our run pace in mile per hour. And on the y-axis, we have amount of energy expenditure. The blue line is fat, represents fat, and the orange red line represents carbohydrate. So as you can see, when we are increasing our exercise intensity, we are increasing the amount of energy coming from carbohydrates. So at the running speed of between, I would say like 6.3, 6.3 is our running speed in mile per hour. We are burning like 4.5 kilocalorie per minute from fat and a little bit less than 7 kilocalorie per minute from carbohydrate. But let's look at like 7. At the running speed of 7, we are burning around 4.5 energy from fat, but we increase our amount of energy coming from carb. It's about around 10, between 9.5 and 10 kilocalorie per minute. So that shows when we are increasing our exercise intensity, we are increasing metabolism of carbohydrates. So as exercise intensity increases, as the percentage of the VO2 max, the percentage of energy provided by fat metabolism decreases, and the percentage of energy from carbohydrate metabolism increases. And this one shows the duration of exercise. So the first figure shows the intensity, exercise intensity. This figure shows the exercise duration. So we have exercise duration on the x-axis in minutes, and on the y-axis we have percent energy from fat and carb. In this figure, the red line is fat and the blue line is carb. So as our exercise duration increases, the percentage of energy coming from fat increases and the percentage of energy coming from carbs decreases. So as steady state exercise continues for a prolonged period, the percentage of energy derived from fat may increase slightly as the percentage of energy derived from carbohydrate oxidation declines. So kind of like there is a positive relationship, I would say, between exercise duration and fat usage or utilizing fat. And there's an inverse or negative relationship between exercise intensity and fat usage. Question: when exercising to support weight loss, do we have to burn fat to lose fat? The second question, what is more important, total energy expended or percentage expended from fat? So as we discussed in this first section of this lecture, total energy expended, it's way important than the percentage of energy expended from fat. So remember that. Do we have to burn fat to lose fat? Not necessarily. We don't have to burn fat to lose fat. A low carb diet, a low carb approach, which means between 20 to 40% of total energy intake from carbohydrate, teaches our body to burn more fat for fuel. And it takes about 10 to 14 days to adapt to a high fat eating plan. So whenever we are increasing the amount of fat from diet, it takes 10 to 14 days to adapt to a high fat eating plan, meaning our body tries to burn more fat because we are eating too much fat. But we don't have to burn fat in order to lose fat. So by saying that, I mean, in order to burn fat, we don't have to like do a prolonged and, low intensity exercise in order to lose fat or lose body weight. It's not necessary to do that. And here's the fat recommendations for athletes. Unlike carbohydrates and proteins, we have like different rules for athletes depending on their exercise intensity and duration. We have very simple rule for fat. Um, you know, when we talk about the fat recommendation, There is just a rule of thumb, and we will discuss that. But it's very important to remember when we say fat recommendation for athletes, it's better to measure the amount of energy needs, carbohydrate needs, and protein needs. Whatever is remaining there, it should come from fat. That's very simple and the rule of thumb regarding fat recommendation. There are some effects of inadequate fat intake. This is common among athletes, uh, elite athletes, recreational athletes. It's very common. They try to lose weight and they try to get inadequate fat intake because they think if they have a low fat diet, they will burn more fat, they will lose weight very easily. But there are some consequences of inadequate fat intake. Remember in the first part, we discussed the important tasks fat can do in our body. So if we have inadequate fat intake, there will be some consequences for that. So inadequate fat intake, it's usually accompanied by energy restriction, and it can negatively affect training, performance, and health. We have inadequate replenishment of intramuscular fat stores. We will have inability to manufacture sex-related hormones. Sex-related hormones are steroids, and steroids are kind of like cholesterol-based hormones. They have cholesterol-based structures. And we will have an alteration in the ratio of high and low density lipoproteins. We will have inadequate fat-soluble vitamin intakes. Fat-soluble vitamins are vitamin A, D, E, K. We need fat in order to absorb these fat-soluble vitamins. So if we follow a low-fat diet for a long time, eventually we can develop fat-soluble vitamin deficiencies. And we have anorexia athletica. So this is a term for like kind of a disordered eating. So they have like inadequate food fat intake and they have inadequate energy intake actually. So they can face some types of the consequences of inadequate fat intake. So here's the general recommendation, general guidelines for fat for athletes. So the general guideline is approximately 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per day, and 20 to 35% of total calorie intake. So that's the macronutrient distribution range, the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. For the carbs, it is 45 to 65%, and for protein is between 10 to 35%, and for fat it's 20 to 35% of total caloric intake. That's the general guideline. And we recommend this also for athletes. We recommend 20 to 30%, 35% of total energy intake coming from fat. And the total fat amount depends on total energy and total carbohydrate and protein. Endurance athletes may need up to 2 gram per kilogram per day. And ultra endurance athletes like the, marathon runners, they can get as high as 3 gram per kilogram of body weight per day. So that's what, just remember the general guideline. In athletes, whenever we determine the energy needs and we determine based on the exercise intensity and exercise duration, whenever we determine the amount of carbohydrate and protein needs, we can easily calculate the fat needs, the fat recommendations, the fat requirements. And the severe restriction of fat intake is not recommended. Why? Because of the all those like adverse effects of inadequate fat intake. And we recommend not fat intake during exercise because it slows the pace of digestion, as I mentioned in the first section of this lecture. So fats, they slow the pace of digestion. So we don't recommend fat intake during exercise. And prior to competition or sport event, as we mentioned, uh, athletes should abstain from getting high fat diet like 2 to 4 hours prior to a sport event. Which statement is most correct? A high intake of dietary fat increases body fat. Athletes should overly restrict fat intake to improve performance. Increases in body weight are due to long-term overconsumption of fat. An increase in body weight are due to long-term excess energy consumption. So that's the. So let's say we know the general guideline and the rule of thumb of fat recommendation for athletes. We need to translate those knowledge to food choices. We discussed the nutrition fact label. Nutrition fact label has different sections. I don't want to go into the detail about this because we already discussed this in previous chapters. The thing we see on the food, the nutrition facts label regarding fats, we have total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol. Sometimes it's optional. It's not mandatory. So reporting total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol is mandatory on nutrition facts label. But reporting the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, it's optional. And some nutrition facts label, they report amount of mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. But generally, these are the things we see on the nutrition facts label. The typical American diet, as we already know, it's like we have high intake of processed meat, red meat, sweets, refined grains, French fries, like high sodium, high saturated fat, high cholesterol, sometimes trans fatty acid, and high added sugar. That's a typical American diet. But there are some ways to modify this typical American diet by reducing the portion size. We can prepare foods with less fat. We can add less fat to foods. We need to order carefully at restaurants. We need to be aware of hidden fats. And, it's better to replace low fat or non-fat dairy products with high fat versions. We can substitute fruits and vegetables for fat-containing snack foods. If we are feeling hungry between meals, it's better to eat some fruits or vegetables instead of like eating just, fat-containing snack foods. There are some dietary supplements, fat-related dietary supplements. This is a knowledge check. Let's do this together and see what we already know. So, these are the main fat related um dietary supplements on the left side. Caffeine, carnitine. Remember, I told you to remember the name of the carnitine. Ketone esters and medium chain triglycerides. So caffeine, which one? It's suggested to reduce reliance on muscle glycogen stores, may enhance free fatty acid mobilization during endurance exercise, may increase blood flow to muscle enhancing recovery, suggested to increase fat and reduce carbohydrate oxidation during exercise. So carnitine is the second one. Carnitine enhance free fatty acid mobilization during endurance exercise. Medium chain triglyceride. It's suggested to reduce reliance on muscle glycogen stores. Medium chain triglycerides are being taken up by muscle cells and being used after we are depleting from, glycogen. We are deprived from glycogen stores. The ketone esters, it's suggested to increase fat and reduce carbohydrate oxidation during exercise. And the caffeine, it increases blood flow to muscle enhancing recovery. So carnitine, I think there's something wrong here. I'm so sorry for that. You know, carnitine is enhancing free fatty acid mobilization during endurance exercise. Caffeine increased blood flow to muscle, enhancing recovery. Um, but ketone esters and medium chain triglycerides are correct. So here we have a summary. This table is from your textbook. And these are the main fat-related dietary supplements. There are other types, you know, more than this, but these are the main ones, like omega-3 fatty acids, medium chain triglycerides, carnitine, and caffeine. And we have the safety. It's like majority of time these are safe at recommended doses, and their effectiveness. It's really interesting. Look at the effectiveness column. Majority of time, many of these supplements are not effective. So carnitine is not effective for increasing fat metabolism. Medium chain triglycerides is not effective. Omega-3 fatty acids is not effective to reduce inflammation. It may improve performance or, for some athletes and some studies showed that there is improvement. But, in total, in general, if we do a summary of the existing literature, these supplementations are not effective. And the caffeine is effective as a central nervous system. It's kind of, reducing the sensation of tiredness. Caffeine. If we get caffeine, it kind of helps with the tiredness. That's all you need to know for this chapter.